They are rage, brutal, without mercy. But you will be worse. Rip and tear until it is done.
Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome to the 95th episode, which means there's only 5 episodes left of a long-running series where we try to find developer techniques or hidden objects that are out of bounds in video games. So hey, hitting you up with another long-time viewer-requested episode, Doom, and this camera was brought to you by Codename Gamma. If you want to show your thanks to this talented lad, you just gotta check the video description down below to check out one of his videos. But I know that right now you're in for some ripping and tearing, so let's get right into it. So of course the first thing that we gotta look at is the opening scene, where we got Doom Guy, presumably naked, and chained to his tomb. Now over in the corner is how it's supposed to look, but from this angle you can see that he has no torso, which in regards to the torso is a sign of resource management. I had to double take myself just to see if a torso is ever shown, and in fact it's not, which in a moment you'll see is not typical for the Doom Guy. But before we move on to that, I want to show you a little bit of a tour of this opening room. Like over in this window here, what's going on exactly. And what you're gonna find here is the body that was cast against the windowsills, as well as what looks like a couple of servers, and a door that doesn't lead to anywhere. Next up, we're going to look at the intricacy of this one little scene right here where he grabs the helmet. Now it all looks really simple, but you got to consider a whole lot of things here. Right now we're using a naked model of the Doom Guy, which we don't need anymore. 2, we have to get the suit on the character and make that the official model of the character for the rest of the game. 3, there is a helmet that the character puts on. How do you make that work without the camera clipping and everything else? So the answer to a lot of those questions is that most of it gets stored just underneath the ground. And when it's that model's turn to be part of the scene, it gets called in. And that visor that you see when you put on the helmet is a separate model for that visor alone. The helmet disappears pretty quickly. In fact, when you look at the character in the third person, a lot of his body remains except for the head, because if the head did exist, it would clip into the camera. So hey, if you want to see what the Doom Guy's face looked like in the 2016 game, I got you covered. Thankfully, there's a model view of the character as one of the unlockables. So if we take the camera through the visor, you can see his whole face, which features a scar on his right eyebrow, as well as brown eyes. Now I know that it's a little bit cramped in here. It's very difficult to see all the features of his face, because if you move just a smidge back, we'd be outside the visor again. That's why I found this image online, which was first sent to me on Twitter, then sourced to me from Reddit, which then was sourced to this DeviantArt account. I had to do a lot of digging to find who originally posted this image, and that user is BlueFlyTrap998 on DeviantArt. So there you go, man, doing my due diligence to make sure you get some credit. Obviously, when you're in the first person, you don't get to see a lot of what's going on, so let's fix that. Here's a little bit of a tour of most of the guns you'll see in the game from a third-person perspective. Some of the interesting things to notice: the shotgun here, which happens to store a slug off screen before being shown, and also the Gauss gun, which has a ridiculous recoil. It can actually look pretty funny if you aim it at the ground. Since the developers wanted the legs to be out of the player's way whenever it's not used in a scene, they end up getting elevated in the air instead, and due to the length of the Gauss gun, it almost looks like you're balancing yourself with it. So zoom outs for Doom are a little bit difficult this time around, because normally I'm able to remove things like fog from any game that I cover on the show, but in the case of Doom, I wasn't able to pull that off in time. And so a lot of the zoom outs just get really dense with fogs, and it doesn't really look that great, so you won't be seeing a lot of them here. However, the Mission Advanced Research Complex doesn't use a whole lot of fog, and not only that, but the environment outside is pretty intricate and interesting to look at. So I figured we can do a zoom out of this area to at least give you the sense of scale that's roughly the same for every single stage. They say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but let's be honest with ourselves, that's pretty much what the Kakko Demon is. So I had to see for myself what exactly is inside the eye of the Kakko Demon. The Kakko Demon's eye is almost fully modeled. Almost. And while we are nestled inside the juicy gob of a Kakko Demon, I figured we could do a little bit of a tour of, I guess, the inside of his mouth. I mean, how often do you get an opportunity like this? So, lots of fans on the Twitter wanted me to do something with the classic Doom maps, and for the most part, I would say there's not a whole lot to see. I mean, you can see them from another angle outside of the map, which is neat and everything, but it doesn't really tell you a whole lot. But there was one thing that I thought was really cool. So get this, every time you discover a classic Doom room, you get a classic Doom map available in the main menu. And while this isn't a shocking revelation or anything like that, there is evidence here to suggest that the map data was copied and pasted into this regular mission map. And how do I come to that conclusion? Well, the demons chained to the walls in this regular Doom map don't open any doors for you, whereas in the classic Doom map, it does. It brings you outside. But if we were to take the camera through the door through the modern Doom map, you could see textures that would never be seen by the player. That is, of course, unless you were playing the classic Doom map, which would be evidence of assets being reused. The Arden Cell is an orb with something in the middle that gives you 3 key upgrades. One of the things that interests me was the thing in the middle. It's so tiny, and you're hardly ever given a chance to see what it really is. Well, zooming in on this little object inside the orb shows that the textures are just identical to the textures that are on the side of the Arden Cell, meaning there was no intention for the player to ever see this up close, given that the texture is mapped pretty poorly as well. So in this segment, I'm going to answer 2 things for you at once. One is, where do enemies come from when they're triggered by a cutscene? And the other is how the zoom out effect is pulled off when it's used in that cutscene. Enemies do spawn in a specific spot, but for the most part, they're not just sitting there waiting. There are very few rare exceptions to that. However, wherever these enemies spawn, they're usually off screen anyway, so there is just a few frames of animation that you're not allowed to see due to the angles of the cameras. Now, as for the zoom-ins, this is really funny. Zoom-ins are pulled off by literally moving the Doom guy wherever the camera needs to go. So even though the game makes it look like it's not the Doom guy that's moving around, he is in fact just behind the camera, with all of his limbs just off screen to give it a camera effect. So I wanted to show you what it looks like on the inside of the Gore Nest when you're deactivating it, killing it, because something kind of odd happens. Taking the camera in there before you use the action button shows you the eye gore that the Doom guy presumably pulls out of the Gore Nest. However, when you press the action button, there's 2 gore eyes inside. It's for a very brief moment, but you can see it. And if I studied this correctly, it looks like it's the second eye gore that Doom guy actually grabs, whereas the other one looks like it's used for a shifting effect for some reason. Now, I mentioned earlier how enemies just kind of warp into cutscenes, and how there was exceptions to that rule. And the only exceptions that I could find were the NPCs. On 2 separate occasions, I found that they were waiting outside the door for you, one of which has an idle pose. Olivia, on the other hand, is completely frozen, but nevertheless, she is just waiting there until you open that hatch. And when she walks into the other room, well, you can see the moment in which she disappears. I was surprised to see that I couldn't find more of these, to be honest with you, but there was 1 cube I managed to find out of bounds. Right outside of the main room is where you'll find it. And what it does, well, without asking the developers directly, there isn't a way to know for certain. Cubes like this can be sometimes used for lighting, loading enemies, or loading characters into a certain scene. We're nearing the end of our rope here, but I wanted to show you Olivia and the Spider Mastermind. See, when you drop down, you got Olivia kind of coming to the revelation that her plan wasn't that great. And then she sinks into the ground and the Spider Mastermind kind of springs up. So I wanted to take the camera underneath the ground and show you what's happening down there. Olivia disappears pretty quickly. However, that entire sequence, the Spider Mastermind is just kind of sitting in place, waiting for his turn to spring up. And so from down below, this is how that looks. And even further down below than that is a room from a Mars space station. And that room is used for the ending sequence. And because it's here, we can explore it for a bit. There's not a whole lot to see, and of course it's very dark because you're not supposed to see much behind, well, Hayden. And You know what, I should probably take that back. There's actually a lot to see behind the fog. I haven't taken the time to try to find a one-to-one comparison, but it looks like it's probably just a gutted room that was already existing in the game. Otherwise, I don't think the environment would go this far back. I mean, all you're supposed to see is Hayden in the fog. And speaking of Hayden, why don't we trigger this ending scene and see what's going on with that? Well, there isn't too much to see here except for one interesting note, of course, and that is that the Crucible is hanging out behind Doom Guy the entire cutscene, which of course the reason for that is that it's used at the end of the cutscene. But it's funny that of all the things that get spawned into this game, like for example using this guy as an item to put his face up to the eye scanner, you know, he totally comes out of nowhere. The Crucible, however, hangs out there the entire time.
I expect you to agree. But with this, we can continue our work.
Hey, thank you very much for watching. Sorry if I look a little dead in the face. I've been going through a lot of crap this week. Yeah, I mean, not to get too personal on you guys, but I gotta leave this place that I'm renting out and find a new place to live. So that's been just like my entire month. That's why there's only been 2 uploads. It's just a lot of life stuff's been getting in the way. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next one is going to have a collab with Strider 7X. So if you know who that is, then you know exactly what game I'm going to be covering. It's going to be a sequence break episode, so I hope you guys enjoy that. And outside of that, not much else. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Of course, check out Codename Gamma stuff if you haven't already. It really means a lot to me because it shows that in some way we're giving back to the man behind the camera. So that's it. Alright guys, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope to see you very, very soon. Fingers crossed on that. Alright, take care.